panels. We like to have our panelists sharing from their heart, like just really open and welcome them. We asked you to look at this as a private conversation. All of these folks go to the same church. We have Pastor Charlie and everyone from a couple of representatives who come here and also go to the church to share their experiences. So you're gonna hear for a little bit, and then we're gonna open for Q&A. So if you have questions, if you're listening to things that caught your eye, just write it down and get it ready, because you get your chance to ask questions too. So thank you all for being here. I would like to start with just asking to introduce yourself briefly, and how long have you been in Progressive?
My name is Aaron Moore. I serve as the pastoral resident at the Progressive Baptist Church. I got there in August of 2016, also an MDiv student and Mosaic scholar here as well.
I'm Emmanuella Carter. I've been at Progressive since fall of 2014, and I help with the women's ministry there.
My name is Charlie Dates. I came to Progressive in the spring of 2011 as her youngest senior pastor. We'll see how long that lasts. And I have the distinct privilege of not only serving that church, but also of serving as an affiliate professor of history and homiletics, or practical theology here.
Thank you.
I'm Jeremy Odekerken. I started going to Progressive in October of 2016. Yeah, 2016. And I'm an MDiv student here as well.
Great. Thank you all for being here again. So for starting, I would like for you to help us understand what's going on in Progressive, and so describe a little bit of what is some of the conflicts or tensions among generations that you have seen in your church and in your community, and especially how that had affected like the participation of young adults.
All right. So when I came to Progressive, when Kiersey and I got to Progressive, she was 93 years old as a fellowship, and the average age, the incoming chairman of deacons told me, was 65. He joked with us at dinner that night that by the two of us coming, we would drop the median age to 45. Kiersey was 29. I had just turned 30. So the church was on a rapid decline, and it dwindled not only in kind of the age category, but it had dwindled in the population period. So about 150 people on some Sunday mornings. So they wanted a young pastor. This is at least what they told me. You gotta be careful when people tell you stuff like that too. The whole church had decided that that's what they wanted. So they intentionally went after a young pastor. But what they did not know and what I did not know is what that would require of the senior population to give privilege and programming and resources and platform space to a new emerging generation of young people who they had not met and did not know. So one of the struggles we're facing, quite frankly, is as we see just an influx of young adults and young adult families, in some regards quicker than we can keep up, is the displacement of an older, wiser, very necessary group of the church. And I've got a few more gray hairs now, trying to figure out how we work together. But God has given us great grace. Nobody's put anybody out yet, and we're holding on together.
Good. You want to add?
Yeah, so one of the things I've noticed, so as in my role, I'm training, the goal of the residency program is to train to take over to pastor a declining historical African-American church. So kind of the same way that Progressive was when Pastor Charlie showed up. One of the conflicts I see, the great thing about the African-American church is that there's such a rich history and legacy, especially at the Progressive Baptist Church. All that it stood for in justice and righteousness, literally being one of the few churches in Chicago that went against the edict not to have Dr. Martin Luther King preach there. And all of that rich legacy being there, and then you have a new emerging generation of African-American Christians who to a certain degree are ignorant of that history and that legacy, and not really understanding some of the traditions that have that take place and what that means to certain people. So you have a conflict that emerges based upon a lack of knowledge and lack of meeting in the middle. But that's one of the things that I notice. Most of the things are just a gap that's there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we talked a little bit about the problem, the conflict, but we also want to know about how is Progressive aiming to resolve these tensions. So if you can share a little bit of what are some of the specific activities or initiatives that you have taken as a church pastor, as the leadership team, but also as members of the church to see these changing.
Since I serve on the women's ministry, I can speak to that. Our women's ministry, it has a leader, which is a young lady, she's in her 20s, but it has a core team made up of like 7 women, and the age varies. So that way, when we plan an event or we talk about doing a Bible study, each generation gets to put some type of input into like what we're doing, which sometimes makes conflict in those meetings. And sometimes ideas, are presented and then they morph into something else by the time they come out. But it pays off when we have like our women's ministry event. Like we recently had one, and we tried to find ways where we could get the older women interacting with the younger women. And so we did like a survey, which incorporated both newer and older elements. So it was just like, take a selfie with one of the grandmothers who marched with MLK, or, finding ways that would create conversation and things like that. But that's one way we've done it, representing everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Would you speak a little bit on how that helped you see or not see these tensions?
Yeah, it helped me see the tensions. Because, like I mentioned, when we would put out an idea, we never considered other people. We just thought, well, what's wrong with doing it this way? And when someone like Sister Angelica, she's one of the older women on our team, she would raise a concern. And initially, I would just be like, okay, yeah, no one's really going to be thinking that. And I would initially blow it off, but then I realized that's so arrogant of me. And instead having to learn, like, well, why do you think that? Like, it created better conversations amongst us as women to understand each other, why we thought it should be done this way versus another way, and trying to figure out where we can each feel equally heard, equally pleased, but also, as we talked about in our meeting, equally displeased, because we all have to give and take.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I also say that it's modeled. I know he ain't gonna say this, but Pastor Charlie models it in the way that he leads. There is a model of honoring the older generation that's there, honoring the legacy, and letting people know that, man, we actually do stand upon your shoulders. We sitting in pews that you paid for, and we thank you for all of your sacrifice. But at the same time, we have a zeal. We want to learn from you. We have a zeal that we need to move this ship forward so that a generation does not go without hearing the gospel. And I think the posture that I witness in leadership, when just something as simple as the worship service, the music, this is very practical. Generational reconciliation. You're going to fight over music. In our context, we're going to fight over either James Cleveland or Travis Green. We need to know. But the beautiful thing behind it is you'll hear both of those in the same service.
Yeah.
And that is not on accident. I see every week we sing a hymn without fail. Every week we sing a hymn. And we sing it at a time during fellowship and communion with each other. As we fellowship and as we greet one another, there is a hymn being sang. And the beauty behind that is if you know any of the hymns have this way to like bridge generations and minister to people because they're timeless. There's so much theology within that. So I think that's one of the more practical ways that everybody is equally uncomfortable in a church service. And you see the older people come to life when James Cleveland is being sung, And it's like, you know, when you at a party and the jam comes on that you don't know, and other people are like, man, I want to know that song.
Yeah.
It's just like that. And then you have now, I need to know this hymn, and older people are willing to teach younger people that.
Yeah, that's really good. Just a follow-up on that. What are some of the things that you think it takes for a worship team or a service to get to that point? You can say that. Go for it.
Oh, I was just saying our worship leader is amazing at blending the old and the new. So he can take a contemporary gospel song and then find a way to incorporate an older hymn and then go back to this contemporary song, and it's still one song. So it's like he's brought in both or all generations into just one song. It's cool.
I'd agree. I think, too, that it's got to start with leadership, that there is a progressive. We're not doing it. We're not the model situation. I mean, we're stumbling along, but God has given us much grace. We insist that it be that way. Part of the reason is my conviction is that the great hymns of the church should not die on our watch. The rich theology, the accuracy of the poetry, the transference of the lyrics is amazing. And I think that when life strikes and you got to call a song back to mind, you need something with some depth to it. And so we say this isn't just for a matter of making older people comfortable, but these younger people need to know this, and we need to know it. So I'd like to every now and then just shock our church and start singing something that they don't think I know. But the crucible of life will teach you the potency of those lyrics, and so music is one. Another thing is that the Bible anticipates generational conflict in this regard. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have Titus 2. Everybody has to know that they have a meaningful place in the advancement of the church. And so we're trying to practically find out in a programming way how to develop organic opportunities, if that's even a logical idea to develop something organic, but how to develop organic opportunities for younger people to be shepherded by wiser, more mature, older members. And then stuff as simple as they love me and hate me for it. I'm missing our senior Bible class now, but they got smartphones and they don't know how to use them. And so they turn them off as soon as they're done making a phone call, not knowing nobody can get through to them until they turn the phone back on. And so we have to take time to say, you know, it's okay. This phone is not going to destroy you. I don't want the government to have all my information. They already have all of your information. Like, there's nothing you can do to get around that now. And then they come back and show me. It happened last week. I got a text from an 82-year-old member saying she watched something on live stream from her phone. She was so proud. She didn't know how to do it again, but she got it done the FaceTime. And so the first time we're able to reflexively help one another. They teach us how to live, how to walk with God, and we teach them how to live in the world today.
That's so good. Jeremy.
I think there are a couple just really like specific and kind of practical things that I've seen since being a progressive, kind of building on what Emmanuella was saying earlier. In almost every either ministry team or leadership team or something like that, there's representation of both older members and younger members. So, I mean, we have deacons that are in their 20s and deacons that are, how old is Deacon Taylor? 87. We have associate ministers in their 20s, associate ministers in their 80s. I think of all of our like discipleship hour classes. You have, you know, people who are really young teaching them as well as people who are really old teaching them. So anybody that's going into those classes can both get the wisdom and get, you know, hear the voice and the opinions and things that older generations have to pass down, but also can see a familiar face, see someone who they can relate to more in those. And secondly, talking about both conflict and resolution, we've recently gone from having an ushers board into having a hospitality ministry, which has provided its own generational conflict just within that move. But even in doing that, you can see just within like that team, there's already more diversity in terms of age. I mean, when I first started going to Progressive, my very first Sunday there, I had never been to Progressive before. I was getting ready to walk in the door. I didn't realize it was during the opening prayer. And I got the door legitimately slammed into my face to the point where like it hit me in the face. And then the usher came outside and started like telling me how like disrespectful it was for being able trying to go in. I was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. But even now, the hospitality be like, hey, like I walked in late to church. Sorry, Pastor. The last Sunday. I forget you don't see these things so all the time. I was walking in late, and they're like, hey, like they're in the prayer right now. If you can wait just a second, we'll let you in like a moment. And it wasn't just because the difference between like an older person and a younger person, but just that team in general has kind of like morphed into something. And like hospitality, that's a biblical principle in and of itself. It's something that we need to be striving for. And so I think just certain like those are just a few examples of how solutions and reconciliation have been brought.
Can I also just tag on? There was something you, Pastor Charlie, did early on, and we talked about it. He did a listening tour where it was like one Saturday for like a month. Depending on which age group you were in, you had to show up on Saturday, and Pastor Charlie had a list of questions that he asked, like how we're doing as a church, how can we engage this generation better, so on and so forth. But he did that for each age group, so that way each like age group felt heard. They felt like they were able to raise their issues or suggestions or things like that, and I think that was huge for everyone. I heard like high reviews on that.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, the posture of humility in submission is huge, because knowledge puffs up, and there's natural ignorance tied to being a youth, especially when you feel like you know something. You've taken a few theology courses, and you think you know more about walking with God than somebody who is 95 years old and lived through several different presidential administrations. That's not the case, and I think the beauty of it is, the ministry of reconciliation, of course, is not just racial reconciliation. We often push this agenda of being multi-ethnic, and what happens is, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, the multi-ethnic church becomes a young adult hangout, and you don't have any mothers or fathers, matriarchs or patriarchs within the church. So the beautiful thing is, when you have this, and you have this sense of submission that takes place there, then you have things like that happen today. You get buy-in from the older generation and they have the wisdom that we need. Prayer meeting would not be prayer meeting without mothers and fathers of the church there. Yeah. And I joked when I saw Dr. Cha when I came in, I said, man, I came straight from the bar. And it was the truth, but we had a Bible study at the bar. Because one of our members owns a bar, how about we use this for gospel proclamation? And where there's young adults littered throughout there was also 2 members within the church that were over the age of 60 that was there. How beautiful is that?
That's great.
And
Baptist, right?
The joke about Baptists, we don't drink in front of each other.
No, we don't. You'll never get that.
So I love my Presbyterian brothers.
Let me say something that I'm learning. Okay. I want to be careful to say we're not experts, right? This may all implode on us in a year. But we did this series for Women's History Month called Black Girl Magic at our church. And at every service during the month, we highlighted one of the sisters in the church who's doing something amazing. I mean, it was the first chief resident at the UIC School of Dentistry was there. Her successor is a member of our church now. I mean, this stuff is just, it is absolutely fascinating. Well, we're rolling with steam. The sister who runs Mayor Emmanuel's office. I mean, just all this wonderful stuff. And we saved the eldest for last on purpose. And so she had marched with Dr. King, lifetime member of the NAACP. She came dressed in all gold. She might have some gold on her head, too. And so we couldn't bring her up to the podium. She wasn't able to walk up there. We met down with her at the bottom and gave her the mic. And right as we're exchanging banter before the mics go live, she says to me, I got something I want to say first, Reverend. Sure, whatever you want to say. She grabs the mic. If it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, the church erupted because there was a sense of credibility attached to that testimony. It's not that it's any less true for someone else, but she was speaking out of her decades-long experience of walking with God. And so in this process, this was intentionally programmed for us to celebrate this woman and say, this is the invention of Black Girl Magic in our church. But it is making sure that seniors feel like they matter. Not just that they know it, but that they feel it, that they are celebrated in front of the body together, and that it's done not in a patronizing way, but where it is, they get to know we're bringing flowers for real. We recognize that we are where we are because you have done what you've done. So we're learning how to make young people work and how to celebrate elders for their work, if that makes sense.
Amen. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. I would like for us to spend just a couple more minutes talking about some of the biblical principles that inspire these. We have talked about some, hospitality, Titus, but get more into it. What are some of the things that even might not be fully connected to only generation reconciliation, but I just feel like it brings light to the issue?
Yeah, well, I think about the biblical, biblical concept of family and how that runs throughout the scriptures and how that's often used to describe the body of Christ, family. And in the Titus 2 model, you see the older teaching the younger. And even in the Old Testament, you have the, bind this around your neck, this stuff that is taught, that is passed down. The principle, that principle really sticks with me. And you see, I've learned in honoring people, my biggest takeaway is that the process in which you make a decision is just as important as the decision itself. And when I'm able, because I have blind spots, I'm short-sighted because I've only lived a few decades, but a couple of decades. But but someone has not only lived but walked. They're able to not just pass down biblical truth to me, but they have this quest for wisdom that has come through pain and heartache and trial. And so yeah, those are the biblical principles, the concept of family, and how you always honor grandmama and grandfather.
Amen.
I think humility, especially being of the younger generation, is huge. So I just have to recognize that, a lot of the older people in our church, they know way more than I do. And while I may have, certain ideas that I think are good and the other people, that can work, sometimes I just need to be like, all right, y'all have done it this far. This church has been a church that's thrived, that's done so much under your watch. And so I just need to be humble and accept, we can work together on this, but in a lot of respects, that's I need to submit to you in this way.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we're not going to church plant our way out of this problem.
Yes.
It's not going to be just the next. Let's skip it and move on to the next piece. When I was in divinity school, and this is no shot at anybody whatsoever, but I remember being overcome by the sense of how many people were running away from historic churches. They wanted nothing to do with them. And they just figured, we don't want those problems. We don't want the leadership struggles. We don't want the transition period. We just rather plant and start anew. Planting is biblical. It needs to happen, but that's not going to fix where we are. Mm-hmm. I think part of what we need is what God did for Joshua. We're talking about this in fact. God authenticated Joshua's leadership in front of the people by moving through his ministry in ways similar that he did with Moses. I mean, Joshua parts the Jordan in the same way Moses parted the Red Sea. Now, Joshua lost a generation in the wilderness, but we need a supernatural move of God. We don't need a strategy. We need God to raise up leaders who have a sensitivity across the generations and a genuine love, and then to raise up others around those leaders to actually get up and to get that work done. I'm convinced that this is one of one of the strongest prophetic witnesses we have to our nation right now. I'm able to go in varying circles or whatever, and I'm able to poll our people who lived through some of the issues of segregation and Jim Crow segregation, for that matter, and hear their heart and how God has healed them. And it wipes bitterness out of me as I go to stand in different places. I don't know where else you get that, right? I don't know where else you get that. It takes God raising up leaders and opportunities for those leaders to serve in that respect. And I hope that he does that in this room, in whatever context in which you serve. We really do need each other. We don't need to run from each other.
Yeah. For me, it would just be looking to the interest of others. So church isn't just about our preferences and ways of doing it, and I'm learning that a lot at Progressive. And so looking how I can best serve, whether that's through listening, whether that's through humility or however, but how can I do that for the sake of my church instead of just thinking that it has to be like my way, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate your comments. I would like to ask you if you have any final words, or especially in lessons that you have learned through journeying in the process of generation reconciliation. Can be really short, just a close comment on.
Also learn from the mistakes of the previous generation. I think about President Obama and what he said. He had a conversation with his daughters. She said, "You mean to tell me I'm going to have to look my daughter in the eye when she asked me that you knew this was a problem 20 years ago and you didn't do anything about it?" So kind of I guess, killing the Amalekites. Be aware of, in a very humble way, but also be aware of some of the mistakes that the previous generation may have made, or some of the, and every generation has mistakes, no matter what context you're in, because life is too short just to learn from your own mistakes, and be able to avoid those moving forward. I think that's a big thing. And to the other side of this is be humble enough to say, "Yep, that was a mistake we made," and you be gracious enough to say, "Man, we got blind spots too. Help us not make that mistake."
I would say out-pray everybody, out-love everybody, have skin as thick as a rhinoceros, and then outlast everybody. Stick it through. And some of you, the Lord's going to call you to places, and it's going to be hard. You're going to pack up and go, but I think you got to hang in there. God will give you strength. He'll give you wisdom, because what he's up to is far more than what we can see in the right now.
This probably sounds like pretty awesome, just like focus on relationships. Some of my favorite people to see every Sunday are some of the church mothers. I said earlier, I've never felt more loved in my entire life than I do by some of the mothers of our church. And when you have that type of relationship, I think that it fosters the ability to collaborate and to work together, and to try to, even when things do go bad, even when you make those mistakes, that like bond of love that you have can make sure that you can stick around and you can continue.